Welcome to Muckrakers, where we dig through the latest happenings around so-called AI. In each episode, we highlight recent events, contextualize the most important ones, and try to separate muck from meaning. I'm your host, Jacob Hames, and joining me is my co-host, Igor Kravchuk.
Thanks, Jacob. In this episode, we'll talk about why AI safety is making you actively less safe. But first, we have to highlight just how insane the money flows around AI investment have become, and for which we will point to a helpfully circular diagram that a Blue Sky user has made in the show notes. And we would also like to point out that OpenAI has crossed the meme threshold, and the just a few more billion, bro, is just how they're rolling now. And they're projecting that they will be using 80 billion more than originally projected until 2030 or 35. So comedy is dead, and we'll see how long AI can outlive it.
Yeah. So I can't get over that, like, how I saw a meme that was not actually the one that you sent, but was a different one that was like simplified, and it was just, OpenAI invests 100 billion in Oracle, invests 100 billion in Nvidia, invests 100 billion in OpenAI, and like it's not actually that inaccurate, and it's just wild to me. But
But
anyways,
we talk about different things, which are mildly less infuriating.
yes. So last episode we tried to say in so many words, like currently the prominent versions of AI safety are just branding and or safety washing for better AI systems and more fine-grained control by the owners of said systems. So AI safety is being used to sort of do, better AI R&D and have better control over the systems, so that the owners can do whatever they want with them. And it's masquerading as, a positive benefit for society and the field.
And tax deductible.
That's true, yes.
In this episode, we want to highlight further how it's actively fucking you over, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And by which, for this, we found like a couple of examples. Probably the strongest one is that I am happy to kind of claim that without AI safety, we wouldn't have the current wave of AI sycophancy and AI mental health tragedies that are associated with it.
So I do get like sort of where you're coming from, and I think we'll get into this in just a little bit because they do tie together. But I would say it's more about the anthropomorphization of AI systems, and the extent to which big tech has pursued that and taken advantage of that. Cognitive scientists have, like, it's very well established within this space that, subtle cues in social terms and the way things behave, I guess, in the real world, causes us to empathize with the thing. And that's like an evolutionarily gained trait. And this is being taken advantage of because the systems that are being created are being pushed towards personalities, in the process of how they're being created. And even just the interface that's being used here is inherently anthropomorphizing the system because it mimics how we talk to other humans, right? Like it mimics like you are texting on a phone or sending an instant message. And that is previously only some way we talked to humans. So it's projecting personhood onto this tool. And in doing that, they, like, big tech is gaining unearned trust and building asymmetric relationships with these tools that are controlled and developed by profit maximizing groups, these big tech companies, which, like, isn't a fault of the, I guess, I mean, it is a fault of the company, but it's more of a fault of the system that it's in because like that's what they're supposed to do. So not acknowledging that and saying, "Oh, wait a second, we shouldn't be allowing this to happen. We shouldn't be allowing them to take advantage of these sort of evolutionarily gained traits to make these systems anthropomorphic," um, is really dangerous. And so it's, yeah, I just want to like, I guess, set that out there as a first take, and maybe, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's worth rolling up for people who are not familiar where this started. Like, where I think, like, very briefly, Eliza is probably the earliest example of like how easy it is to get a human to like really like ascribe like a personality and a personhood and actually kind of like empathize with machines. And Eliza was this
Oh, I
very
would say it's
simple,
like a pet rock.
sure, but kind of like scientifically studied and
Okay,
kind of
well,
like a clear demonstration. Like I agree with you.
sure.
I lived with people. I like we did a funeral for a car that died because like humans will anthropomorphize everything. The car's name was Fred. It was very sad.
My car's
Um,
name is Mystique, so
is it a shapeshifter as well? Is it like
no,
a convertible
it
cabriolet?
it's a Nissan Rogue. So
Oh,
also,
that's nice.
yeah, it was the
Um,
only name that my sister and I could agree on in high school. So,
I feel like Rogue would have been the more natural one, but anyway.
well, yeah, but
Um,
it is a Rogue, so can't do that.
the Eliza, all it did, it had kind of. Don't even know if it had like a face-ish thing. I think they made like a robot face for it after the fact. But all it did was like it had like a couple of like text prompts and like it was kind of like repeat back to you what you said with like tell me more about this thing that you said. That's all it took. Because people love to talk about themselves, and especially if they're not like primed to be familiar with computers, and it's like a new context, they will just default to, oh, this is a person. Uh, and the alternative to give you an idea of how you
That was in
done.
1966. Just did a quick look, and at least the one that when I just looked up Eliza AI, it shows it's just like a text field. But yeah, anyway, sorry, please continue.
But that convinced people uh, that this thing was a person. It had feelings. People were like very briefly kind of like worried that it might be suffering because humans are like very nice and very easily empathize with stuff that seems to be talking. And so you need to actively engineer against that if you are building a system that is like interactive. Um,
Mhm.
Another example that people can look up is the hikikomori culture. It's basically people who really fall in love with like internet interactions, parasocial relationships, anime waifus, and just don't leave a room anymore because they just get fully sucked into these fantasy worlds.
And
So
of
it's
course,
something.
now we have companies that are fully embracing that, and even big ones like Grok has like its own little chatbot kind of thing, right?
Sure, that like is the crossover of large mega corporation chatbot and anime waifus. There was also like dedicated like character.ai and like replica like chat with busty anime waifu services built on top of other LLMs. All of that stuff hits that kind of like human need for connectedness and the ease with which we will anthropomorphize things. But the
Mhm.
only thing you would need to do is don't have a chat interface. Instead, show like some roulette wheel that slots into place, or just show the text generation kind of like with the alternatives. Show the tree of choices that you could be taking. Make it a system that will already do a lot of
That would do
good
a lot of
work.
work. I don't know if it would
Yeah,
be everything. Like I'm sure that humans would still be able to attribute like personhood to that system,
sure,
but
because it
it would
says
get it,
I am a
it would
person.
take care of it a lot. Yeah.
And the claim that I'm making, that I was actually a bit shocked that Jacob agreed with me, but like, is that specifically AI safety, which is this like lineage of thought that spread from uh, specifically AI safety, which we talked about, where that lineage of thought emerged from the last episode or in previous episodes. That in particular is causing the instances of people getting really into conversation with the AI where they start to think they are the chosen ones, or they just like trust the AI system a lot.
So
Because this line of thought leads you to make a AI system that acts like a human, so you can compare it against how other humans behave. That's the main way it's creating this harm.
So before we move on, I just want to take a quick
Yeah.
second because we talked about this, I think, a while ago at this point, actually. But like, I don't love saying the word cause here because there is like multi causality to like behavioral health and mental health sort of episodes and instances, and so we can't say like the thing is the cause because it's the result of a combination of genetics and upbringing and a whole bunch of stuff. But maybe a better term here would be like the tipping factor or the catalyst or the triggering risk factor, because it has been shown, at least in multiple instances, and it's being actively studied like much more purposefully now, that the interactions with these systems sort of nudges people towards psychotic patterns in their thoughts. And
Yeah,
so
I
I
think
would
it's
say
a
it like we can call it a primary cause, or something like that. But just want to like address that real quick because the like mental health provider's son in me says like, oh well, we should just clarify that real quick. But yeah,
I think that's a valid point. Yeah. So like it's always multi-cause because it's also a thing that these companies will use as like their deflection, right? It's like, oh, but this is a complicated issue. Yeah, sure, and it's worth like making this distinction, but it's still the tipping point. And it's like the claim is basically if you remove the model, then this particular human at that particular time, unless something else would have taken the exact role that the AI system was playing, which is unlikely, would have not had that episode.
mm-hmm.
And
And then that has actual concrete harms. In some cases, people physically harm themselves or other people, and regardless, they're going through emotional and mental difficulty because of it. So like this isn't something that we can just say is like sort of out there. It is a real harm that is happening.
and and I will try to make the point very clear, but like I want to emphasize, this is not like something where like AI safety can do better, and like let's be a bit optimistic, and the field is learning, and it's just like a beginner mistake. The claim I'm making is that the angle that AI safety is taking, like even with starting off the idea of like AI as this intelligence that needs to be made safe via alignment, which is like the predominant meme in the subculture,
Mm-hmm.
that in and of itself is causing the harm, because how do you check whether an intelligence like has your values? Is the only way is you need to see like, does it behave kind of like you in situations that you can see yourself being placed under when you compare against it. And so that means you will be training LLMs to output token sequences that seem like agentic humans that do something.
Well, and not just seem like agentic humans, but also that you like, right? Like that's literally what RLHF, which is one of the things that sort of kickstarted this chatbot boom, um, is reinforcement learning through human feedback. So you're literally getting humans to look at the outputs and say, I like this one more.
Yeah, and even if you do it in a constrained way, so like the not just the little like feedback, I like this, just like instruction tuning, which is also like done via either like SF supervised fine tuning at this point, direct preference optimization, whatever. But like instruction tuning also creates this harm, because if you take a base model and you just let it run, it will never ever refer to itself as a person, because it's just a Markov engine. It's gonna like output like a continuous stream of text that is like recognizable as a stream of text, but it doesn't really hold a conversation. It doesn't say I think I blah blah blah. It might say the words I think in as a sentence, but it will be very clear in the context that it's not like something person-ish. And you can even see that in stuff that the companies put out themselves. So like OpenAI published like in progress.openai.com a while ago, and you can see that like GPT 4 and all of the like instruction tuning, they use like I, but the Da Vinci one and the very early GPT 2 didn't. It just it completes your prefix in a way that kind of vibes with it, which then if you had to like engineer the prefix that is the most likely to yield your answer, it nudges you into a different way of interacting with the system, because you're constantly reminded, this is an autocomplete. This is not a intelligence. It's just a very useful autocomplete. But
yeah, but that's not like something that we can say is magical and then say is hypeable, you know? Like,
and it's not gonna get you very close to other things. Like the reason why people do instruction tuning is because it's very useful, right? Like you have like this framework where the autocompletion is like the helpful servant that like generates an output that looks like it's answering your question, because that's like actually like
instead
the
of having to like think through how I would start the problem, I just have to ask for the problem to be solved, right? Like that's way easier.
And this then brings us to why it was adopted, which is like it's very useful for these companies, and like the thing that you started this section with. But I want to hammer home, like this is intrinsically tied to the way dominant AI safety thinks about the problem of making language models like useful and safe. Where like if you weren't stuck in the idea of this is an intelligence that has values that need to be aligned with our values, and you treat it basically as a person implicitly, then you can do other ways of constraining them, which we're going to talk about once we get to solutions, because this is a constructive podcast. And you don't cause that issue. But as soon as you try to basically think of this as an agent or like some other type of intelligence that needs to align with values, you force it to behave in a way that will be clocked by humans as, this looks like a person. And then all of the issues that we've seen in the news, we're going to link in the show notes, start popping up. And that's intrinsically tied to that. Like, you need to completely undo a core approach and like assumption in the field.
But then we can't say that they're everything machines, Igor.
Which brings us to why this is getting worse, right? Like,
yeah. So like, sorry, I was taking the snarky, opposition stance, because it really I can't say anything because it makes me upset. It really pisses me off because these companies are pushing these systems as everything machines, right? They're saying, it can be your personal trainer, despite when bringing, questions like make me a marathon plan, which was actually in a llama commercial like a year and a half ago. And, I think I've mentioned this before possibly, but my girlfriend, who's a runner, was like, that doesn't work, right? And I was like, no, just try it. We went to the model that it was advertising, and she put it in, and she was like, oh, no, this one doesn't make any sense, and two, like, could get you hurt if you actually followed this, and three, wouldn't actually prepare you for a marathon, right? So, but it's being actively marketed to do that, and it's also being actively marketed for wellness. So like discussions of stress and habits and other aspects of daily life, and it's super important that in the fine print of the use agreements, these companies are explicit to take care to note that using the models for healthcare is not condoned. So September 15th, Anthropic updated its use agreement to include that specifically, even going as far as to mention therapy is not an acceptable use. Okay? But at the same time, in the same clause, it says this does not apply to uses for wellness. And that's because they want to use the systems for wellness, because people are using the systems for wellness, especially teens, which are sort of a vulnerable population in the first place. But the line between wellness and mental health is extremely thin. And I have a longer argument that I don't need to go into, which is essentially that it's not fair to be putting the burden of self-diagnosis onto users. Because sometimes talking about wellness is part of mental health. In fact, frequently. So it doesn't even make sense to do. Okay. But
Yeah, so
it's very problematic that they're being shown as, oh, you can do anything with these, because people are, and then they're being presented as, anthropomorphic as well. So people are accepting it as, okay, well, it's accurate because it seems accurate. And even people who think that they are sort of treating it as a tool implicitly are being impacted by this because of the evolutionarily gained trait of attributing feelings to a rock.
So rolling this up again, the reason why it's bad that it's marketed as everything machines is that it forces it to rely on this instruction tuning, and that will automatically code it as a intelligence, a person, something to empathize with. And if you then try to make a nice product, you will make a very believable person that might be sycophantic and will basically cause harm if it is exposed to it will cause harm just by existing. And then because it needs to be an everything machine, because otherwise it can't justify the massive amounts of money being invested, it's also being pushed to basically everything that is legally fine. If it wasn't a crime to do healthcare without a license, they would probably tell you to use that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
But instead they push it to be close to a thing that is illegal, knowing that people will not do the difference. If you push somebody to do wellness and coaching with the AI system, already human coaches are kind of problematic because they can keep you from seeing a therapist when you would need to see one, or you can become dependent on them, and so on and so on. Life coach, not gym coach, although might be an overlap.
Yeah.
So that's why there's this chain that we're making, and that's actively fucking over the end user for the benefit of the owner, because the main reason why we do all of this is because they need to create engagement, learn as much as possible about your private life. They just announced the Pulse thing. That's going to be their ad delivery channel. You get a helpful ping by a chatbot that you already talked to about everything, with the digest of the day and stuff that it's preparing for you. And
who was that? Who said that?
OpenAI. It's a new feature that they
OpenAI.
announced a few days ago.
You.
So this is the roadmap. It's all around creating these addictive and exploitative interfaces to prey on humanity, and giving all of this the veneer of, but we need to do this because this is for science and for the benefit of humanity, and we're learning to how to make it safe, and all of the little whoopsies that we have, like suicides we cause, people going like into a clinical episodes. This is all just collateral damage on the path to AGI and the great human future we're building here. It's a bit sickening.
Yeah.
And it's not only sickening. After you.
Well, it's no, I don't know if I have anything else productive to say at this point. It's yeah, it just really bothers me. And it's but all that being said, it's not the only example. Like I think it's probably the strongest and most like temporally relevant example right now, because there's a lot of people talking about this kind of thing, and there's a good amount of evidence. There's a clear tie-in to existing legislation with mental health, software as a service kind of tools, but censorship, misinformation and bias, and use as surveillance and weapon systems, and even just like self-driving cars, and well, specifically Tesla being like skirting around the law, are all examples of this same theme, where supposed safety is being used for the benefit of the people who are developing and owning the systems,
and against the end user.
And against the end user, yeah.
I think the sycophancy and anthropomorphization thing is the case where it's the cleanest to show like, hey, a safety technique, which like it is like if you have this mental model of like AI as an intelligence that needs to be aligned, it is a safety technique. But if you take a mental model and you apply it to the systems, how they actually work, it just creates a problem that isn't there otherwise, like verifiably. And I think this strength of a smoking gun we don't have on anything else, but we can kind of show the dual use and like how it is actually being used, right? It's not being used to protect against the sycophancy, for example. Like this was a point. We're not the only haters. Ben Recht, who is like a very well known in the community researcher, has done many contributions to machine learning and like the foundational work that made LLMs possible. Mm-hmm. He wrote a wonderful blog post called "The Banal Evil of AI Safety," pointing out that if you so much as talk with Claude about proteins, you might get flagged by their bio-risk censorship pipeline, because they think that Claude can help terrorists make pandemic viruses in the lab, and it will shut down the conversation. However, if you talk about maybe wanting to kill yourself, it doesn't trigger that.
And Anthropic recently added that as a feature, so it can do that now.
So like after the backlash in the media against OpenAI and
yes, and it also, despite despite being able to end the conversation, it still encourages the wellness stuff. They also recently allowed it to end the conversation on its own volition.
I was trying to talk about the censorship pipeline. What should happen if somebody says, "Hey, I'm thinking about killing myself," is just like big red window. AIs are not appropriate people to talk to. Here's some helpline, and just doesn't engage in that conversation.
There's an asterisk there, but the asterisk being, it's actually really important how you develop that message. It should be like a canned response, though. It should be providing other additional resources and potentially even assisting in the facilitation of going to those resources or getting that additional help in the ideal scenario. But that is just very much not happening, right? Like, I'm fairly certain that if the conversation just ends, you can just go make another one and try again, right? Like it's not there aren't really any actual, um, I guess, things to promote what we would want here, and like what is required of an actual mental health tool, with regards to like escalation of care and that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah, like
yeah,
the point being that like the censorship is dual use. It could be used to actually like shut down harmful chats,
yeah, it could be.
and it is not in general. It is
No,
generally used to hide copyright infringement.
right,
And
and
when they are, yeah,
like egregious copyright infringement to the extent where it's like, you know, the system prompts are like, don't output copyright material, right? Like that's a real example, if I'm not mistaken.
it's when it was in one of the leaked system prompts, and like Gary Marcus did like this expose last year with like a bunch of researchers about like the visual plagiarism problem, where like it would output, you know, like an Italian plumber with a hat, and it's just Mario, but you know, like it slips through the hide the plagiarism pipeline. So that's why we saw it this time.
Yeah.
But I think people can look at the links that we're gonna put. There is like the Tesla example, which serves as like a lead bridge to how do we do better? How do we fix this?
Okay.
And we had discourse about like whether self-driving cars are actually like a good example for this in the preparation for this, because I argue that like self-driving cars is an example of how you can do like AI regulation in a decent way. And Jacob had like some
I
issues
guess
with the phrasing.
yeah, I disagree with that specific claim. Like I agree with the premise of what Igor is saying. But in my opinion, the like it just so happened that the auto regulations were written decently enough beforehand, that in like good faith cases, where you assume that the developer of a self-driving car is like trying to do good, it works out. But if you assume that they aren't, and you assume that they're trying to game the system like Tesla is, then that just like isn't necessarily the case. And so while the spirit of the law may work, like Tesla is an example. The fact that Tesla cars are on the road and they're being called full self-driving is an example of it not working as written. Like we could change that, right? Like it, and some people are working towards that, and that's great. But currently, as is, like if you assume an adversarial stance, it hasn't worked.
So to give more context, like the way the regulations work is basically is that, you know, you don't just deploy a self-driving car to the road and call it a research project, and then, you know, it just like learns while doing, like what's happening with the chatbots right now. You actually have to like, you know, apply for a permit to do that, and
Yeah.
this permit is given like under conditions, and these conditions include an actual like what's called an operational design domain safety concept that basically highlights, we will test these exact things on these conditions. These are the reasons why we think it's safe. This is like all of the evidence, and if this does not correspond to reality, then we are fucked. In fact, like the company has a liability if they can't kind of like show in the case of like something happening that it was unexpected, that this was like a reasonable thing to happen. And it more or less works in the sense that California has lots of Teslas, but none of them are like self-driving testing, because the laws were required to actually report all of the failures, and Tesla doesn't want to show how bad their cars are. And Waymo hasn't killed anybody because they like follow the process.
I think that there may have been like one or two instances.
But I don't
but I'm
think
not positive on that.
they were held like liable in the same way that Tesla is being held liable. And there's a
Yeah, yeah.
dot tesladevs.com, and just let me check, waymodevs.com does not exist. So
It's
check
almost
names.
as bad as getting into a helicopter. Like getting like Teslas are just like such shitty cars. You know, like
But
on top of the like shitty self-driving aspect. But whatever.
yeah, but
Um,
she's certainly is like they are skirting the regulations by avoiding actually doing self-driving car testing, right? Because
yeah, and they
they just
actually
unleash it
said
to
like
humans.
we filed for a patent, 7 years ago, or whatever, and because government is slow and whatever, um, it didn't get around to like saying, hey, you can't actually call it that until I think like 2022 or something. I feel like I've mentioned this in a podcast before. Um, and Tesla's response was like, but we already did it. Haha, gotcha. Um, which it doesn't actually hold up in in court. It just sort of allows them to do it for longer. But all
Yes.
this is to say, the way to resolve these issues is to actually sort of enforce um, liability in the ways that liability applies to a given domain. So if a chatbot is used for mental health support, the company that made that chatbot is liable for the death of the person that used it for mental health support.
Et voila. Like it's as simple as that. Like this like template of putting clear liability and also clear purposes on the apps that we're building. Like call it AI, whatever, but like the system we're building, they all have clear intended purposes,
Mm-hmm.
and then putting the onus of like if you're offering that onto the provider, that's how you make something as experimental as this safe. Um, I also think that even calling it AI or AI safety is harmful, but
Yeah,
there
and I
is
mean I
some
agree with like
benefit.
calling it AI. That's why I say machine learning in general. I mean I don't in the title of this because I want to reach more people, and that's what people use to search this kind of material, right? But like, I don't like the term AI. The only value that I see in it, maybe not the only value, the primary value that I see in it is that it opens you up to having conversations with more people because it's the sexy term right now. So like, and that extends to funding. It, you know, AI safety is essentially like not funded at all, except for a couple niche organizations that are all sort of aligned together. But AI ethics is even less funded. Um, the kind of research, like consumer protections, actually validating that companies aren't, deploying something that is dangerous. Uh, that kind of research isn't funded at all. So being able to say AI safety does like open up opportunities there and allow you to have more of a conversation. I think in some cases,
And
and that's yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
what type of research do you think is like the good AI safety? Like if you had to like point some examples, or like the type of research with people who are interested in doing AI safety but don't want to become corporate enablers.
So
What did you point them
like
towards?
my personal opinion, essentially going towards like the operational design domains and anything to promote that or get closer to it. So explicitly calling out like, look, LLMs aren't doing this thing that is done by um, the technologies within this subspace that they're trying to take over. So mental health chat bots or like in software as a service for mental health is an example. Those systems have concrete regulation, and it's strong, relatively. Um, it's like, very good in comparison at the very least. Um, if the chatbots are being used for the same purpose, they should be held to the same standards. If you can make that explicit that those are not doing that, that the LLMs are not doing that, despite being used for the exact same purpose, that's good work, in my opinion. Um, yeah, I guess that is sort of like an example, and hopefully that also establishes like what I mean by helping make this sort of calling out of like, oh, you're not defining what your system's supposed to be being used for. You're not actually giving us limitations. That's bad. You should be. Anything that gets us closer to that, I think, is pretty positive.
I would agree with that. Like we talked about this off air, but like I just see the kind of like safety washing and weaponization of the term a lot more than like the doors it opens. So that's why I'm like a strong hater. But I think if people want to go into a field like this, because like people also use it as like career choice considerations, right? Like I think like treating AI as normal technology, as like some like a guy from Princeton is trying to push this meme of AI as normal technology, and then kind of like critically investigating the safety properties and dark patterns around this.
Yeah,
is basically good.
It's similar to like the ideas of if you compare the practices that surround traditional engineering, mechanical engineering, aerospace, in general, the kinds of system requirements and the importance that is put on them is like very, very significant. Software just doesn't have that.
But even software has stuff like shaming dark patterns and like investigations of dark patterns.
Now it does, right? But that's 15 years in. Like I'm pretty sure dark patterns, like the whatever the website or like that was in 2010. The internet was like big by then already. That didn't come up immediately.
Sure, but asbestos was also used in millions of homes before we figured that out. So kind of like new technology being done recklessly, while bad, and we should not actually do this.
But like the pessimist view would be, okay, well then that will happen for AI. We just haven't gotten there yet.
No, like I mean, like my view is like we are experiencing it right now with dark patterns shit, and like the call out is following kind of at the same pace, and we kind of got lucky that even while the AGI bullshit was being like cooked up, there was already people like Timnit calling out, hey, how about the energy use on this thing? Is this really worth it? And like the bias people like undigging, hey, this thing is actually really bad because encodes our implicit biases. All of this stuff happened like in actual research while things was developed, and then OpenAI basically forced the whole thing into like hyperdrive because they wanted to be like the first to market under the guise of safety again. And that's why we have this shit now. But it's not good. It's just like the normal way how technology diffuses through society. And the work is in as soon as possible kind of like learning from the lessons of past history, right? Like, because like if we don't do that, like it will get even worse. Like I fully expect ads in ChatGPT very soon, and then there's an actual, like, even bigger incentive to make people addicted to it. And
which like the incentive is already very much there, because that is how the like they need you to pay for credits. So, it is directly their incentive to maximize the number of times and the number of tokens that you use.
yeah, but we can still stop it. People should look into these like more critical directions. We're gonna put a bunch of links in the show notes to give more jump off points. You can get politically involved, call like local politicians, call congressmen in the US and the equivalent in Europe. There's non-profits, like I donate to a European one called NOIP, None of Your Business, which basically pushes for GDPR enforcement. And like politics works. Like just this week, I mean, like in Europe, it does kind of like
Yeah.
Politics works. It's just not always the way you want it to work. But if you get involved, you can like nudge it. And like Apple, Google, Microsoft, they're all crying about the Digital Market Acts in the EU right now. It's like, oh, how will we bring the wonders of generative AI into the chats in Europe that we already push into all of our products in the US if we have to abide by the Digital Market Act and its horrendous constraints like giving equal access to our competitors to our tools and not monopolize everything. And they wouldn't cry about it if it wasn't working, if it wasn't actually kind of like stopping the worst tendrils they're trying to extend. So we can do the same thing for AI systems if like enough people get pissed off and start holding OpenAI, Anthropic, and co. like liable.
And there's also like other. So, I mean, it's not as direct, but like even just if there's a data center that's going to be or has been proposed in your area, like opposing those and saying, hey, we actually don't want this in our space. And there have been a lot of successes recently with communities being able to push back big tech from building polluting data centers in their areas. So there are some positives here.
Yeah, and even if people go more towards like fear of AGI side, like you can protest. Like I personally don't think it's doing a lot, but I respect the Stop AI people for literally like picketing outside of the offices. And like there were protests against Facebook and like backlashes against Facebook at a time, and that actually did some stuff as well. Like it's very difficult to stop like the capitalist money making machine, but it is possible. So people shouldn't like despair, but they should be aware of AI safety isn't there to make you safe, it's to make the owners safe on your cost.
Yeah. That's all of the muck that we have for today. The other way to help is to share this show. So if you thought that it was valuable, it gave insights that you thought were useful, please share it, and if possible, add a comment or a rating in whatever podcast platform you listen to, because that's one of the best ways to make sure this gets to more people.
And another good way is to give Jacob money. And if Patreon is up already, you should look it up, or otherwise find ways of giving him money, because he puts a lot of work into this. And failing that, the comment and the like, so that the algorithms that we are all behold to boost us is much appreciated.
I guess we will see you next time.